The next item of business today is a members' business debate on motion number 8221 in the name of Paul Martin on the effectiveness of existing dog control laws. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put. I'd be grateful if those members who wish to speak in the debate could press the request to speak buttons now, and I call on Paul Martin to open the debate. 7 minutes, please.
Presiding Officer, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all the members who supported the business motion in my name, and also welcome the support that's been received for the business motion from across all the parties represented in the Chamber. On Friday the 18th of October last year, 8-year-old Brogan McCraig suffered horrendous injuries when she was attacked by 2 American bulldogs in the back court area of her home in the Githamlock area of my constituency. Not for the bravery of a local passer-by, Brogan may not be here today to tell this particular tale. The physical and psychological wounds experienced by Brogan, she suffered long-term, will take some time to heal. Brogan has missed her education during this period and has also underwent a series of painful operations and skin grafts to repair the damage to her face, a number of other injuries which many of us would consider extremely experienced and concerned. Thousands of similar incidents involving out-of-control dogs have been recorded over the last 5 years in Scotland. And, Presiding Officer, in Scotland, over the last 5 years, we've seen a 17% increase in such incidents. For many children who have suffered because of the current dog laws, action has to be taken. Presiding Officer, last month I arranged a meeting with the First Minister and a number of mothers who have also seen their children victims of dog attacks. Veronica Lynch, whose daughter Kelly was killed by 2 Rottweilers in 1988. Zoe Hall, whose 4-year-old daughter Sophie Bell was seriously injured by a Labrador. And in July this year, as I mentioned earlier, Brogan's mother, Tracy Cox, was also in attendance. The accounts we heard were harrowing, and indeed the Daily Record have highlighted and pointed out a number of pictures of children who have suffered from dog attacks. Presiding Officer, they don't make comfortable reading, but it does tell the real story of the anguish experienced by many families as a result of these serious dog attacks. So, Presiding Officer, what can we do? Well, as I say, as a result of last month's meeting with the First Minister, the Scottish Government have launched a consultation document. And I do welcome this, and I welcome the very positive discussions that took place with the First Minister during that meeting. I also welcome the First Minister's commitment to a summit to discuss how we take this issue forward and ensure that we look at the possibility of how we can promote responsible dog ownership. I'm hopeful that we'll allow further debate to take place in this issue and, of course, consider what robust measures can be put in place to deal with the issue of ensuring that we can bring forward responsible dog ownership. On the issue of microchipping, can I put on record here today that I am strongly in favour of compulsory microchipping. I think for considering ensuring that we look at the possibility of using this particular method to ensure that we promote the possibility of responsible dog ownership. A lack of compulsory microchipping or any kind of mandatory licensing, I think, suggests to me that we are not serious of ensuring responsible dog ownership. Of course, proper enforcement of these particular controlled measures, combined with the regulatory maintenance of a central database, would be integral to the success of this. And of course, we would have to ensure that the necessary resources are put in place to ensure that such a compulsory database would in fact be a success. Another measure that might be worth considering is the introduction of a restricted breeds list, similar to that we've seen in the Irish model. The list includes 2 breeds which are banned currently in the UK, but also large breeds such as Rhodesian Ridgebacks, German Shepherds and Rottweilers. These animals, or crosses of them, must be muzzled in public places, walked in short leads by persons that are no younger than the age of 16. These dogs are not earned their place in the list because they are perceived to be any less dangerous than other dogs or less aggressive than a Jack Russell or a Yorkshire Terrier, but because of their physical attributes, their weight, their height and their jaw strength, make them very dangerous dogs in public, possibly. Presiding Officer, Brogan was attacked for 6 minutes while she was rescued by a grown man who punched and kicked the dogs while she was being mauled by these dogs. If it weren't for their bravery, as I said earlier, we would not be here for this particular story to be told. Following such attacks, it often transpires that owners were not fit to be owners in the first place. If a restricted breeds list was put in place, then perhaps we could prevent these individuals being owners in the first place in that respect. Presiding Officer, I think more focus needs to be placed in ensuring that we assess owners in the first place and also consider the environments that the dogs are being kept in. When a family wishes to rehome a dog from an animal charity, such as the Dogs Trust, then they're often required to undergo a home assessment. I believe there is scope to introduce such measures for the ownership of such dangerous dogs in the future. Presiding Officer, in conclusion, I think it would be very easy for us in the comfort zone of this debating chamber to play it safe and not consider perhaps introducing muzzling, perhaps introducing licensing and perhaps introducing microchipping or a restricted breeds list. However, I believe we owe it to Brogan and all of the other victims to ensure that we take robust action and do that in a way that will make a genuine difference. Thank you very much, President.
Thank you very much. Speeches of 4 minutes, please. I call Christine Graham to be followed by Graham Pearson.
I thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I congratulate the member on securing this debate, though it follows from extremely tragic circumstances, as he has narrated. And I note that the First Minister sat through that speech, and I therefore welcome him setting up this consultative forum on how to reduce, if not eliminate, dog attacks. These are horrendous, they're avoidable, and I have to stress they're not the fault of the animal. An owner is the person at fault. And under the Control of Dogs Bill, we moved the shift from deed, not breed. And I note what the member said about restricted breeds lists, but in there lies an inherent problem about defining what is a breed, because so many of these dogs which are bred for aggressive purposes are in fact crossbreeds, lurchers with bulldogs and so on. It's not a breed of dog. And I think that one of the problems under the Dangerous Dogs Act was it gave 4 breeds of dog, which did not, in fact, were not the dogs that were then doing these awful attacks. So I just say that's some of the difficult issues in the legislation. And we need to consider measures very, very carefully, because the attack that was mentioned on Kelly, of course, brought about the Dangerous Dogs Act, which was legislating in haste and proved not to be effective legislation. Not the only example, but one. And, you know, we have a whole plethora of legislation dealing with the issues so importantly raised by the member. With the Dogs Act of 1906, the Civil Government Act Scotland Act of 1982, the Dangerous Dogs Act of 1991, the Control of Dogs Order 1992, Anti-Social Behaviour Act 2004, Animal Health and Welfare Act 2006, Local Authority Bylaws, the Control of Dogs Act. There are loads and lots of legislation out there. What I want us to be doing as part of this review is to look at, is this effective? Not only is it effective, is there an opportunity here to look in reassessing this and perhaps considering new legislation to say, is there an opportunity here to have a Consolidation Act? Instead of having all this legislation scattered to the winds, to bring it together to do with breeding, licensing, sale of dogs, ownership and so on. I don't see the clock, so it's difficult to tell how much time I've got. I want to deal with microchipping, because I went into the microchipping debate that Claire Baker had earlier, and I'm absolutely for universal microchipping, but I have issues with it being mandatory for these reasons. And again, I'm open to argument. Will the bad owners, will the people we know who, in fact, breed dogs as aggressive weapons, who use them to tear other dogs apart in dog baiting, will these people have their dogs microchipped? I don't think so. Will the people who, in fact, have their dogs stolen and their dogs are then used as bait, what would happen to the microchips in those dogs? They can be removed. It's a wretched, wretched, evil process, but they can be removed. Who will update the records of the microchipping? Now, we already have it under the Control of Dogs Act, which is very useful, but that is tracking that particular owner on that particular dog. The changing of hands of dogs is a difficult issue, and it's not to say it is not a good idea, but it is to say if we're legislating, the detail, the practicalities are so important. Now, I have to say, to give an example of a piece of legislation that really hasn't taken us anywhere, was in fact legislation of the licensing of animal dealers, young cats and dogs, Scotland regulations, 2008. Now, that's supposed to regulate the sale of kittens and puppies under the age of 12 weeks. I've done FOI'd every local authority in Scotland, and I can't find one application made under that regulation. Now, I don't believe for 1 minute there's nobody selling or dealing in puppies and kittens under the age of 12 weeks. But they're not licensed, they're not applying for licences, they're not being checked. So there's a piece of legislation gathering dust on the shelf. On the other hand, the Control of Dogs Act, and this is not, pat myself in the back because it was started by Alec Neil, has been relatively successful. It's a kind of suck it and see with legislation sometimes. The number of notices served from February 2011 to November 2011 was 67, and the number of investigations 693. It's only been going 2 years. But for a full year, from 27/02/2012 to the same time, 2013, 147 notices served, but 2,080 investigations. So it's not good enough, but there's a wee piece that's working. So when we're considering what we do about these horrendous attacks, we must look at what works and what's sitting on the shelf. And finally, because I've no idea of the time, because there's nothing working.
Unfortunately, yes, you're just, if you could draw to a close now, you've had about 5 minutes.
It's the shortest of paragraphs. I welcome the continuing debate, but I think you hit the nail on the head about education, assessments in the home, assessments of lifestyle, so that the right people, for the right reasons, get the right dog and look after it properly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Apologies about the clock. We'll reset it now. Graham Pearson, to be followed by Margaret Mitchell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First of all, can I congratulate my colleague in enabling this debate today on the serious issue which surrounds the ownership of dogs and the damage that can be done by those dogs who turn out to be dangerous. The situation of Brogan highlighted yet again circumstances where young people particularly can suffer the most awful experience at the hands of a dog which is out of control. But we all know in this chamber that daily there are dozens of incidents involving dogs, and over the year there are always incidents where serious injury and serious mishap occurs because of dogs which bite, which attack, which frighten people, which are used to provide security for criminals, which are also used to deliver a form of intimidation in a neighbourhood and within an estate, which can on occasions attack postal officers and postal workers or other public service providers in our communities, and, as a side issue which we often forget, dogs which foul public places and cause concern for parents who are worried about their children who play in these public areas. This whole area is a nightmare in terms of our experience and otherwise. But it operates against a context where no doubt we are a nation of dog lovers. I have owned dogs myself and enjoyed every moment of that ownership, and thankfully the dogs that were under my control were not involved in such issues. But we need to take cognizance of the very matters that have been raised by my colleague Paul Martin and by my colleague Christine Graham, that no matter the numbers of pieces of legislation that have been introduced, we still face month on month the problems of people being attacked and seriously injured, and we need to try and find some means of dealing with these threats. I welcome the beginning of a consultation process, and I would hope that on the back of that consultation process, an expert group can be brought together to act with some speed to look at the consultation, the recommendations which are there, and on the basis of evidence to look at the way forward. There is significant public concern surrounding this issue, and that group should consider licensing. They should look at the opportunity to train owners to ensure that they are fit and proper people to have dogs under their control. There is no doubt it's not dogs that are the danger per se, it's a lack of good ownership and proper control of dogs by human beings. And that's about people accepting their responsibility. Microchipping, I think, is an important issue. If we know where a dog has come from, we can identify who those owners should have been and who should have maintained control. The use of leads and how they are utilised in public areas to properly control dogs is another issue that that group should analyse, and also the use of muzzles, which is very controversial and is suggested may cause more aggression than reduce aggression, but we need to get good advice in that regard. The proper enforcement by housing associations on the conditions applied to tenants in regard to dogs. And we should also look at ridding our communities of stray dogs which are in our presence. The numbers of stray dogs in communities are of much concern, and although thankfully not often involved in these terrible circumstances, they add to the problems and to the threats faced by our communities. So once again, I'm delighted that my colleague had introduced this debate today, and I'm pleased to have taken part in it. Thanks very much.
Many thanks. I now call Margaret Mitchell, who will be followed by Patricia Ferguson.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I begin by thanking Paul Martin for bringing this debate to the Chamber today? Oh, it's way down here, sorry. Congratulate Paul Martin for bringing this important debate to the Chamber today. It is totally unacceptable that dog attacks occur, as they do every year in Scotland, including some horrendous attacks on children. However, it's also essential that these attacks are put in perspective and to remember that the vast majority of dog owners are responsible and that dog attacks in Scotland are thankfully falling. Currently, there are a range of measures available to control and prevent dangerous dogs from posing a threat to the general public. These measures include educating owners on how best to train and control their dogs, intervening on irresponsible owners, and tough sentencing, including banning orders that can disqualify a person from owning a dog. The question is, are these measures sufficiently robust and working in practice? I therefore welcome the Government's decision to consider whether further measures such as compulsory microchipping, which is to be introduced in England and Wales next year and which can benefit all dog owners, are necessary. It's important not to exaggerate the potential impact microchipping could have on ensuring responsible ownership. The Government has revealed that when licensing of dogs was mandatory and for dog owners, it was estimated that only 50% of owners held a licence at the time when licensing was abolished, which highlights the problems surrounding enforcement. Irresponsible owners will continue to be irresponsible, and it would therefore make sense, I believe, for breeders to be required to microchip the puppies and dogs they sell. Turning to the argument for compulsory muzzling of all dogs, I believe this to be excessive, and it appears to penalise the vast majority of dog owners who are responsible and whose dogs present absolutely no threat to the public. Furthermore, it would do nothing to deter the vicious attacks that take place at home, nor would it help address dog attacks on Royal Mail postmen and women who endure over 100 of these attacks each year in Scotland. But the home assessments to which both Paul Martin and Christine Grain referred to would certainly help here. South of there should be a move towards tougher banning orders for irresponsible owners and harsher penalties for breaching a dog control notice. South of the border, measures are to be introduced to increase the maximum sentences for owners where their dog injures or kills, and this should help address the breeding and training of dangerous dogs to act as a weapon for the owner. Here, the penalties should equate with sentences for the use of conventional weapons for this purpose. These dogs are a world apart from the hundreds and thousands of dogs in Scotland who are not just pets, but integral members of the family. So whilst I very much welcome the Government's consultation, it is essential to ensure that any measures taken to prevent irresponsible dog ownership are fair to the vast majority of owners who have well-behaved dogs. The real objective and difficulty will be striking the right balance between sending an uncompromising message to irresponsible dog owners, who can range from hapless individuals to owners that are breeding dogs with the intent to cause injury, and recognising the rights of responsible dog owners and dog lovers, for whom, as the owner of 15-month-old West Highland Terriers, Jack and Jamie, I declare an interest and count myself one.
Thank you very much. I now call Patricia Ferguson to be followed by Malcolm Chisholm.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and may I also congratulate my colleague Paul Martin on securing this important debate, and also wish a full and speedy recovery to Brogan McQuaid. The motion Paul Martin puts before us today rightly recognises that the 2010 Act, promoted by Christine Graham, was a major step forward in tackling the problems experienced in many of our communities. That bill sought to ensure that the actions of a dog were what constituted an offence, not simply the particular breed of dog involved, recognising, as Christine Graham has demonstrated, that it can be very difficult to establish the breed of a dog, and that in the right circumstances, or perhaps that should be the wrong circumstances, almost any dog can become out of control and cause problems. Now, we've read in our newspapers and we've heard here today so many harrowing stories about dog attacks on children, young people whose minds and bodies are scarred because a dog was out of control. Clearly, the fact that there have been so many instances in the last number of years would suggest that perhaps the legislation we have does not go far enough, or perhaps we're not resourcing it to the level that would make it as effective as it could be. Now, I would accept that no legislation, no matter how robust, can remove entirely the possibility of someone being bitten by a dog. But what we must ensure is that we have done all in our power to reduce as far as is possible the threat out-of-control dogs pose. Now, let me say here and now that I, like most others in the chamber, am a dog lover. And I regret very much that the lifestyle of my household means that it's not sensible for us to have a dog. Indeed, it would be downright selfish of us to own a dog, because our working hours mean that there's rarely anyone at home, and we couldn't provide a dog with the amount of exercise or attention it needed. But some people seem to see a dog as a status symbol or a fashion accessory, or, frankly, as a sign of how tough they are, and give little thought to whether or not the environment and life they can offer a dog will meet its needs. And the consequences of a frustrated, angry, or out-of-control dog are all too obvious. In my view, Paul Martin is absolutely right to call for all dogs to be microchipped, with the details of their owner's name and addresses registered on a database that can be checked by the police or by dog wardens, who now have the prime responsibility in this area. And let me briefly demonstrate why I think this register is needed. Last year, a constituent of mine was out walking her daughter's small dog in her local area. Out of the blue, a larger dog, which lived at the home of her neighbour, ran out of its owner's garden, grabbed my constituent's dog and savaged it to such an extent that the vet had to destroy it an hour or so later. But the story doesn't stop there. My constituent and her daughter were distraught and reported the incident to the police, which is when the problems really began. Because the people who owned the house where the dog was on the day in question denied that they were its owners. It belonged to their son. When questioned by the police, he also denied ownership and claimed it belonged to his partner. She, in turn, said, no, actually, it's my uncle's dog. The upshot was that it became very difficult to identify the owners and made the experience of my constituents even more difficult than they were already experiencing. So we need to have a way in which dogs can be easily identified and where their owners can be traced with some certainty. And to me, microchipping them at the point at which they are sold or exchanged should be compulsory. I accept that there are problems attached to that, but we can legislate in this country for the movement of livestock. So it surely is not beyond the will of parliamentary draftsmen to put in place something that would work. As I've said, When you consider the way that some dogs are trained to be violent or bred to be violent or denied the amount of exercise or stimulation they need, it's perhaps no wonder that they sometimes go wrong. In previous times, all dogs had to be licensed, but that system didn't work either. Perhaps, Presiding Officer, we now need to consider licensing the owners, but only after they have proved themselves to understand their dog's needs and are committed to training and to looking after their dogs as befits its breed type and their home circumstances. But for now, at least, let's get the dogs microchipped and have a real debate around the very welcome consultation the Scottish Government has now undertaken to make sure that we both put in place a robust regime, but one that is properly resourced and one that we can be proud of and which gives us some certainty that we have done everything that we can do as legislators to try to resolve this issue.
Thank you. Before I continue with the debate, can I indicate to Parliament that several members would still like to contribute, and to allow them to do so, I'm minded to accept a motion from Paul Martin under Rule 8.14.3 that the debate be extended by up to 30 minutes.
I move, Presiding Officer.
Many thanks. Is Parliament agreed? Thank you very much. I now call Malcolm Chisholm.
To congratulate Paul Martin on bringing forward this important motion following the terrible attack that took place in his constituency, and I'd also like to congratulate him on all the campaigning action he has taken following that attack. Of course, it's not just his constituency that's affected, and unfortunately, most of us here have stories to tell from our own constituency about terrible attacks. Some have got into the papers, one not too long ago in my constituency in a block of flats where a dog attacked 5 people, and I know Jenny Mara, speaking soon, will have similar attacks to describe. But of course there are also the attacks that take place every day that we never hear about in the newspapers. This is a massive problem that has to be addressed, and that's why I welcome the government's consultation paper, which I hope will lead to changes in the law. Now, of course, that consultation paper also ranges more broadly over important issues like dogfouling, and I think we need action there as well. But that is not the subject of today's debate. It's the attack by dogs on human beings. And I start with the principle that all that matters here is the safety of children and other people, and no right of dog owner, not one single right of any dog owner, overrides that. So we must do whatever is necessary to protect children and young people. And as I said in a recent debate on microchipping, I think I feel that particularly strongly now that I have 4 young grandchildren of my own. So microchipping, yes, certainly. I think there is no debate about that. We need that, and Patricia Ferguson very clearly gave a demonstration of why that is necessary and important. I also think that licensing should be very seriously considered, and my present position on that would be that that should also be reintroduced, because it would help to assess whether owners were fit to possess a dog. Of course, there are issues about enforcement. We're told when there was licensing before, half the people didn't license it. So I think everything we're saying today assumes that we have a strong dog warden workforce, and of course in many areas we already have such wardens. I think when it comes to assessing fitness, I also think that more frequently we should be saying that person will never have a dog again in their life. If a person has been found guilty of having a dog which has attacked someone, particularly made a serious attack, I think that person forfeits the right to have a dog for the rest of their life. And I know that's a concern of some of my constituents that they expressed recently in a block of flats, and I won't go into the details of that situation, but it did impress upon me the need for such a provision. Now, of course, we then go on to leads and muzzles, which are more controversial. Paul Martin dealt with that very comprehensively and fairly, and I think I more or less take the same position on that. Clearly, under dog control notices, leads and muzzles are required for certain dogs. But there's 2 problems with dog control notices. One, they're not used often enough. In fact, I believe some local authorities never use them at all. But secondly, of course, they arise after a problem has happened, after an attack has occurred. So yes, we do need more dog control notices. It's my last minute. I don't think I can take? Yeah? Okay.
A quick point of information. It's not after an attack has taken place. It intervenes at a much earlier stage where people have concerns for their well-being and their safety. So it's long before an attack takes place.
Malcolm Chisholm,
okay, well, I thank the member who obviously knows the bill, since it was her bill, so I take her point on that. So in a sense, it's consistent with what I'm saying, because I'm not speaking against dog control notices. Let's just use them more frequently, which was my primary and fundamental point. But final point is I do think that preemptive action over and above dog control notices may be necessary, particularly because they're not used very frequently. And that's why I am inclined to support the Irish system of some breeds of dogs having to be muzzled and on leads at all times. That is the precautionary principle. I'm only saying I'm inclined to support it. I'm very happy, of course, over the next few months to listen to views and objections to that. But I do end with the principle I stated before, that nothing is more important than the safety of children and other people, and I think, therefore, precautionary action should be supported.
Many thanks. I now call Jenny Mara, to be followed by Hansala Malik.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I want to start with some comments that were made in Dundee Sheriff Court just this week by Sheriff Alistair Brown, who was looking at a case of an attack on a 2-year-old, and he was using the Dangerous Dogs Act. And Sheriff Brown made some comments from the bench that I think we're all very aware of, that the Dangerous Dogs Act 1991 that came through under John Major's government after the brutal death of Kelly Lynch by 2 Rottweilers in Dundee, is an insufficient act of Parliament. It doesn't give the bench proper powers to punish. And in fact, just this week, again in Dundee, the Sheriff was not able to properly punish the dog owner under this act. And I'm very pleased that there is a review of dog legislation going on in the moment at Westminster, and I think that's very important. But I think there's so much more that this Parliament can do. And I'm very interested in... We've spoken before, Christine Graham and Kenny Gibson, I think, and myself in this chamber, about the Doggy Asbo legislation that Christine Graham put through Parliament just a couple of years ago. And I was very interested in the figures that she gave, but I think she might agree with me as well that perhaps the legislation is not properly understood throughout the whole of Scotland, and perhaps that is a case for a bit of post-legislative work, perhaps by the Justice Committee, because she did cite some figures that clearly it is being used. But in my own region, I know that Dundee City Council has not issued one dog ASBO under the legislation, and I believe in Angus only one dog ASBO has been issued. And indeed, some of the community wardens I speak to as well believe that dog control is actually within the power of the police, but of course the 2010 Act puts it within the control of the local authority. And I think this is an important point because given how many dogs there are in Scotland and how many dangerous breeds there are in Scotland, it's very important that our legislation is very clear and unambiguous, so we know who has the controlling power to reprimand the owners and to take control of these situations. Yes.
Christine Graham.
As the member mentioned Dundee, I've got the figures in front of me. She's quite right. In the period there haven't been any what you call dog ASBOs. But I think what's important is the good thing is in Dundee there was only two investigations in the first 6 months, but in the following full year 136 investigations. And I don't think we should underestimate the significance of dog wardens turning up and investigating an issue. It's a bit of a warning shot in the first place.
Jenny Mara.
No, indeed, and I would agree with the member, but I do think we need to improve awareness. However, having looked at this issue over many years, I believe that the legislation we have in place doesn't go nearly far enough. I really believe that even since this legislation came into being 2 years ago, we've had horrific attacks in Dundee. One little girl last summer severely mauled by a dog. The legislation we have in place is not preventing attacks, and I think it is preventative measures we need, because no amount of reprimanding the owners after the attack has happened is going to give any comfort to the children who have been mauled, maimed and terrified by attacks, and the parents who have to watch their children go through that. I believe we're at the stage where we seriously need to consider muzzling, perhaps leads in public places. This isn't easy stuff to deal with. This is controversial, but the Irish government The Irish Government have put a list, I believe, of 10 breeds of dogs and crossbreeds thereof that they have specific measures in place that will prevent attacks. I think we need to look at that. And how many more attacks in our communities must we witness until we look properly at these preventative measures?
Thank you very much. Finally, in the open debate, Hans Ala Malik.
Thank you very much and good afternoon, Presiding Officer. First of all, I want to thank Paul Martin for bringing this topic to the Chamber today. I genuinely believe this is a very serious issue, and I know that he has very serious concerns, particularly in trying to help his constituents overcome the difficult period that they have gone through. As a young boy, I have experienced some horrific experiences myself. I have seen people breed dogs for the sole purpose of making them fight each other. I have seen breeders breed dogs for the sole purpose of being violent, being guard dogs and the like, with no consideration whatsoever of what the outcome would be if that animal attacked somebody innocent, or in fact be in a position where the dog itself would be in danger, let alone human beings. So it's a horrific experience if you do experience these experiences, and they will never leave me. I once was chased by a dog like that, and I can assure you it's not a pleasant experience. And I think that one of the issues that most people are now concerned about is the fact that they want to see a stop to the victims of such animals, that they face such dangers in the home of all places. I am a politician, and I, like the postman, have gone to many post letter boxes. And I can assure you, when a dog jumps at you at the door, it gives you a fright even at my age. So, there are issues about how animals are actually kept. And members have suggested that, it's not the fault of the animals, and that's right, it isn't. It's the fault of us, the human beings, who are supposed to be controlling, helping and supporting those animals, training them appropriately, and making sure that they have the right aptitude to be living amongst children in particular, or living in society, because our youngsters are at risk. And we know they're at risk because we have the facts in front of us. And people who have been viciously mauled by these animals carry that for the rest of their life. And, so we really need to take this the topic very seriously. And I'm really glad that Paul's brought this here today, because I think it's important that not only should animals, all the dogs be chipped, but I think it goes further than that, because people who actually perpetrate these, and I call them crimes, who breed dogs specifically to hurt people and hurt each other, they're the ones who will be the ones who will not be doing the chipping of animals. They will still be slipping through the system. And this is why it's important that we need to make sure that that is not allowed. I have known people in farms and backyards breeding dogs, not registering them, not training them, making them deliberately violent, training them to be aggressive. That happens all around the world. But we in Scotland, I think, need to once again show the lead and make sure that we address this issue in a way that it is positive. It's in a way that we actually take a grip of this in terms of not only animals coming into Scotland, but also, I think, the animals that are on our farms and businesses and guard security firms and the like. The police force gives you a very good example, and our armed forces who have dogs who are very highly trained. They don't go around mauling people. So it's possible, it's doable, but we have to have the tools of the trade, and we need to make sure that we give people the tools of the trade to make sure that we actually eradicate this issue by visiting farms, visiting kennels, and making sure that even shop owners who actually trade in the business, they need to make sure that any animal they're selling is actually chipped and responsible. Thank you very much.
Many thanks. That concludes the open part of the debate, and I now invite Rosanna Cunningham to respond. Minister, if you could do so in 7 minutes, I'd be obliged.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I welcome all the contributions that have been made today, congratulate Paul Martin for bringing this debate to Parliament. And of course, we discuss this today against a background of recent and continuing reports of dog attacks, including the particular cases mentioned by Paul Martin himself. I think it's useful to remind the Chamber that both civil and criminal law can apply in respect of a dog's behaviour. The basis of each is different, and the standard of proof for each is different. And if I turn very briefly to the civil law, the Control of Dogs Scotland Act 2010 gave us new powers, or gave local authorities new powers to help promote responsible dog ownership. And where a dog is considered to be out of control, a local authority can issue a dog control notice on the owner of the dog. And Christine Graham is quite right to remind us that the 2010 Act is preventative, as an actual dog attack does not need to have happened before a dog control notice can be issued. And I think that's an important thing we need to remind ourselves of. A number of conditions can be imposed through a dog control notice if it's decided that that is what's required, as well as a mandatory requirement to have a dog microchipped. Other conditions may include having the dog muzzled while in public and the owner having to undergo training in the control of their dog. And the aim of the legislation is for steps to... Very briefly.
Patricia Ferguson.
I think the Minister is absolutely right to reinforce the point about prevention, but I think my colleague Jenny Mara hit the nail on the head when she said that not everyone is aware of what the rights that they have are, and therefore don't always report when there is a dog that is beginning to exhibit those kinds of tendencies. And it might be worthwhile to have some kind of education programme or advertising programme that would help.
Minister.
I think that the member is absolutely right about that, but I kind of would remind her that the legislation was aimed at empowering local authorities to be able to do a lot of this. And I want to come back to the issue of that a little bit later on, because the aim of the legislation is for steps to be taken by dog owners before an out-of-control dog becomes a dangerous dog and someone is attacked. And of course, in civil law, cases require to be proved on a balance of probability basis. And between February 2011 and February 2013, the first 2 years of operation of the Act, local authorities did carry out approximately 3,200 investigations into potentially out-of-control dogs, as a result of which 240 notices were issued. However, Presiding Officer, as some members have noted, there are large variations in how local authorities are using the legislation. In Edinburgh, for example, there were 164 investigations carried out between February 2012 and February 2013. In that same period, Glasgow conducted only 5 investigations. But as an exemplar, Aberdeen City conducted 317 investigations. So it's difficult to understand why these variations have occurred. And I think there's a little bit of work that needs to be done in respect of that, because these are important powers for local authorities. And we are clear that local authorities should be using these powers to help control dogs in their communities. And I remind people that this legislation does not need to wait for an actual attack. It can be brought into play before that happens. Alongside the new 2010 Act, we also have long-standing criminal laws to deal with dangerous dogs under the 1991 Dangerous Dogs Act. And that, of course, does make provision for prison sentences. And under the existing criminal law, a dog owner can only, however, be held criminally liable for their dog if they had a reasonable apprehension their dog would behave dangerously out of control. And, of course, that is an issue that's come to the fore as a result of the Dundee case. And it is as part of this government's determination to ensure our approach to dog control keeps our communities safe. So I can assure members that we will be looking at whether or not our criminal laws should be changed to keep them more in line with how the civil dog control notice regime works. However, such a change would have the effect that no prior knowledge by the owner about a dog's likelihood of aggressive behaviour would be needed before a conviction could be obtained, and there would be a controversy about that. So it would have to be considered carefully, and of course the criminal standard of proof required is the case be proved beyond reasonable doubt. It's a different standard of proof. But consolidation, as suggested by Christine Graham, may therefore be even more complicated than such exercises are normally, given we're dealing with both criminal and civil law. And just a caution on the listing of breeds. I understand why people raise this, but can I say from personal experience, the only time I've ever been bitten by a dog in my life, when I was a small child and bitten on the face, it was a dachshund that did it. Now, I'm pretty sure a dachshund would never be listed. So, you know, we do have to be a bit careful when we start talking about breed listing. So just after Christmas, the Scottish Government launched a consultation to seek views on what new measures may be needed to deal with both the public safety and dog welfare problems associated with irresponsible ownership. And our consultation does seek views on a number of measures that may help to promote responsible dog ownership. But of course, that doesn't exclude other issues being suggested, discussed and considered. We've raised the issue of mandatory microchipping of all dogs, and at a personal level I have to say it's hard to make an argument against mandatory microchipping of dogs in the current circumstances. We know that some dogs are still unfortunately mistreated, and that where their welfare has been compromised, this can sometimes lead to dogs lashing out. I think Trish Ferguson was right to point that out. Compulsory microchipping could reinforce the responsibility an owner should have for their dog's well-being. We want to talk to people about the practicality and effectiveness of widespread microchipping of all dogs. In addition, we are raising the issue of dog licensing. The reintroduction of dog licensing would have to be done on a different basis to what it was before, because it was ineffective before. It could be done in conjunction with mandatory microchipping. The two are not mutually exclusive. And I think that those two things together would probably promote responsible dog ownership in a way. I need to press on, if the member would allow me. And I do think there ought to be some question of criteria for ownership. I think that needs to be part, if we're going to reintroduce dog licensing, we would need to understand that potential owners were suitable. We've raised the issue of compulsory muzzling, and I hear the views in the Chamber. I think that would probably be the most controversial aspect of the consultation. The consultation runs until the end of March, and I do urge people with an interest to offer their views. In March itself, we will be holding a summit, bringing together key interests such as local authorities, the police, victims groups, the whole wide variety of organisations and others, to discuss what more can be done to promote responsible dog ownership. And as a number of people have said, we do have to remind ourselves that the vast majority of dog owners in Scotland and the vast majority of dogs are well-behaved, socialised and cause no danger to anybody. And our consultation, the summit and our reviewing of the criminal law is focused on seeking views and evidence as to what more practical things we can do to increase the safety of all of our community. I think it is right that as a government we are doing this. It can of course include measures in addition to the three referenced in the consultation. And once again I want to congratulate Paul Martin for bringing this forward.
Many thanks. That concludes Paul Martin's debate on the effectiveness of existing dog control laws, and I now suspend this meeting of Parliament until 2:30 p.m.